Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the final Hand Internet Live session. I'm Tom Hunt. I'm going to help moderate with Chuck Cassidy today, and we have a panel of experts in various fields that are going to help you to get ready for life after fellowship. So that's the title and the subject of our Internet Live session tonight. And these are the people that that are going to be with us. So you can see myself on the left, Amit Gupta, Chuck Cassidy, Kyle Bickle, Kim Mazzara, and Becky Nadisky. And I think as we get going here in a minute, I'm going to ask each of these people to say something about their current jobs, their positions, and I think that's going to help when you hear their perspective in regard to life after fellowship. So here are our various relationships and conflicts of interest. And just a note about Zoom etiquette, your microphones are all muted, videos are turned off, and please send your questions through the question and answer box at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We're going to really use these questions tonight, so they're going to really guide our discussion. So please, anything that's on your mind in relation to what you're about to go through or have been through, please bring those to us through the Q&A. And I think with that, I think we'll go ahead and get started. What I'd like to do first is ask Chuck, and then perhaps we can go around in order. Actually, I think Amit, you were the first on the list. Go in order and just give us a little history of yourself and what perspective you might have.
Well, thanks, Tom. I started life after fellowship as a partner with Kleiner Coutts and Associates, and I was there for many years. Following this, at that time we were also looking after the fellowship at the Kleiner Coutts and Associates, University of Louisville, and the University of Louisville Orthopedic and Plastics Residency Program. I then went off to the University of Louisville and Norton Hospital as a private practice and academics combined practice. And now I'm with Louisville Arm and Hand, and also look after the residency program of the Orthopedic and Plastic Surgery of University of Louisville.
Great. Thank you, Amit. Chuck?
Thanks, Tom. And thanks to all of you for joining us tonight. I've been blessed. I trained in the Tufts program and did my hand fellowship in the Tufts program. I was offered a position when I was a resident and have stayed there ever since. I had a sabbatical, which is something to consider before I even started practice. So after I was employed, but before I started practice, after my fellowship, I spent a few months at the Mayo Clinic with Bernie Morey and Sean O'Driscoll learning about elbows, which gave me a little bit of a foothold in Boston, tight Boston market. And if you stick around long enough, eventually you become chair. So I've been chair since 2005, and also been the program director of the residency program and co-director of the hand fellowship.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Chuck. Kim, you're up.
So I in Dallas, and I did my training in New York at HSS for my fellowship. And then I came back to Dallas and joined UT Southwestern and did 13 years in academics at the Level 1 Trauma Center. So I have that. I was the director of the hand service and the hand fellowship there. And then I decided to leave that environment, and I went into kind of a corporate environment with HCA, and worked there for about 6 years, kind of in a arrangement with HCA, which we can talk about later. Maybe there's some questions that'll come up that has its pros and cons. And then about 2 years ago, I decided to go into private practice. And so I'm in my own private practice, still in Dallas. And I still have an affiliation with Texas Scottish Rite, and I still do a lot of teaching and with residents and fellows there. So I have kind of a interesting practice in that I have a little bit of academics and then in the private practice setting. So that's kind of my story.
Sounds like you have a lot of perspectives too, so that's going to be good. I'm sorry, Kyle, I think I skipped you.
Oh, it's okay. I'm here. It's always good to hear what my colleagues have done and are doing. My career started in academics. I was at Johns Hopkins immediately after fellowship, and I was a co-founder of the hand surgery service there with Tom Brushart. We had a combined orthopedic and plastic surgery service. I did that for just about a little under 5 years, and then came back to California, where I was originally from, and I've had a hand center here in San Francisco for a little bit over 20 years. And I have an appointment at UCSF on the clinical faculty, so I interact with the residents in that respect. And our practice is sort of a private-demics practice. We have private practice, but we get to teach residents and fellows, get the best of both worlds in that regard.
Great. And last but not least, Becky.
Hi, my name is Becky Nadeski. I am currently living in North Carolina, in Burlington, North Carolina. I am the Dean of the School of Health Sciences at Elon University. I started my career at Washington University in St. Louis and was for 15 years worked in a level 1 trauma hand practice with the WashU surgeons, Millikan Hand Center. I also worked at Shriners Hospital for Children. Of interest, I've also been to Guatemala 18 times. I've been to Nicaragua 4 times. So I've done a lot of global work, also done work in Cambodia and Haiti with the Touching Hands Project. So I have quite a bit of international work. I continue my practice through those mission trips, but I also help manage our pro bono clinic that our physical therapy students do at Elon University.
That's great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And my name's Tom Hunt. So I'm chair at Baylor in Houston. But my career really began in private practice in a multi-specialty group. I guess it's probably better to characterize the job as that. And it transitioned through to another multi-specialty, more academic group, and eventually to a clear-cut academic position. And I've got to say, it's interesting that a number of us have had changes, it appears, through our professional careers, and we've gone from private to academic, so we have a lot of different perspectives. I would tell you one of the reasons I ended up moving into academics is I found myself trying to teach my scrub nurse, and which is all well and good, except most of my scrub nurses had no interest in what I was trying to teach them. Of course, sometimes the residents and fellows are that way too, I suppose. But that kind of led me on the path that I took. So I think we certainly all have our own story. So why don't we just get started? Why don't we talk a little bit about the decision? So when do you all think you decide what form of practice you want to go into and where you might want to do it? And once you've kind of decide that, how do you go about it? Anybody?
Yeah.
Sorry, I'll speak up first. For me, my practice was a natural extension of my training in that I was exposed to academic medicine all my medical career. And so it was natural for me to go into academic medicine. I felt I would be out of place in private practice. And I didn't really have a business interest at the time, ironically becoming chair ultimately, but I didn't really have that interest. And I love teaching, and I was fortunate to have the opportunity to be involved in teaching through the program with progressive autonomy. It was pretty progressive back then, and I had great mentors. And so I think your mentors will help to guide you in that direction.
So before somebody else speaks up, Chuck, so you had mentors, but they were all academic, correct?
They were, yeah.
So how do you find how do you have the private mentor? Can anybody speak to that?
Well, so for me and for our residents, we do have actually half of our residency is spent in private-demics. We have the New England Baptist Hospital, which is an orthopedic specialty hospital, elective hospital, and we have a community hospital. There are many, many more surgeons at those hospitals than at the core hospital, but the residents spend the majority of their core time with faculty assigned in terms of mentorship, one-on-one experience at the academic center. So there are opportunities, and I'm sure you all in the audience have the potential, have the opportunity experience that and hopefully gravitate toward people from a variety of backgrounds in terms of helping to make your decision.
Tom, can I speak to that a little bit also? I think it also has a lot to do with where you do your fellowship. So not all of the fellowships, not all of the best fellowships in the country are at purely academic institutions. I did my hand fellowship at the Curtis Hand Center at Union Memorial. And although it's academic in that there are fellows and residents from Hopkins and from University of Maryland, the attendings are all part of a large private group. When I was there were 13 of them. And they had a private practice that they ran independently. And then they had the hand center that they all taught at. And those of us in the fellowship would spend usually a day or two a month in their private office, attending office hours with them, et cetera. And so for us, it was a great opportunity. You know, we had all done residency at various academic institutions and had a lot of exposure to that. But for me, it was a good way to see the other side where you could stay academically involved and still have, you know, a very successful private model as well. So I think that when residents are looking for fellowships, it's important to try to investigate the different fellowship paradigms there are to get exposed to, you know, different ways of life, because I think it's unfortunate if people come up in the ranks and they only see one pattern and they don't really know what's available. It doesn't really help them make a decision.
Right. So I think that the participants, it might be helpful for them to hear us talking about perhaps what are the pros and cons of academics and the pros and cons of an employed model, and then the pros and cons of a private model. Tom, maybe you could speak to some of the academic, you know, what are the upsides? I mean, you mentioned teaching. What are some of the downsides to academic medicine? I mean, why would you, or what would things that would make you think about maybe not going into academics?
Well, I think first really is a discussion regarding employed versus non-employed, because academics is an employed model, as are multi-specialty groups and other private employed positions. So I think first, if you're going into academics, you have to be comfortable with the employment concept, and you have to be in general comfortable with being part of a large organization with the red tape that goes along with that. Now it's started to even out a little bit, I think, over time, because in the private world, I think there are more requirements and so forth too. But I think that's one component that as you're thinking about academics, you first ought to think about that. You know, do you like being part of a big organization? And then if you get past that and you think, yeah, I kind of like the comfort of that. I like the pluses and the minuses of it. And we can talk about that in more detail, maybe in relation to other forms of employed positions. Then you start to think about what's your day-to-day like, you know, and I mentioned for me, it was about having learners that were interested. I would get bored, you know, I just wanted to talk to people that wanted to talk to me. And I think that's a big plus. But on the other hand, if you're a person who doesn't really want to talk that much, who wants to go get their work done, they're more, you know, more focused on strictly patient care, then I think that's a negative. And I think some of those extra responsibilities or requirements, whether it be teaching or whether it be research-based things, unless you're interested in them, they're just going to draw you down. And so I think you have to know yourself, and you have to kind of look at yourself from the past all the way through the future, and really try and figure out, you know, where, you know, what fits me. It's interesting, you know, I'm sure Chuck and Amit can comment on this too. I have a lot of people that when they're deciding on what they want to do, their natural inkling is they think that you have to be involved in basic science research to be in academics. And as we know, that's really not the case. You know, there are all sorts of different forms of involvement in academics. And what makes a great academic department from my perspective is a blend of people who like to do different things. So finding that place that needs your input in your component, I think, is an important thing to do. I think I'll stop there. I've been carrying on for a while.
Dr. Amit, do you guys have anything to add to that from the academic standpoint, like pros or cons?
Well,
Maybe cons
you
are
know,
more interesting.
my
Yeah.
situation was very much as Carl described. I was doing a fellowship at Kleinert, and at the, almost in the middle of my fellowship, Dr. Kleinert came in to me and said, I wanted to join the practice, which was like a no-brainer at that time because it was one of the biggest hand surgery centers. We had 35 fellows. I wanted to teach and do research, so it was just natural that I just drifted into that and just took up all the free flap work and everything. So it was a big challenge for me, but it was very, very fulfilling. It really was, and a lot of work, a lot of research work, both basic science as well as clinical work, clinical research. So I agree that you don't have to do basic science, basic bench research to be an academic. You can do a lot of clinical work, like my colleague, Dr. McCabe, used to do a lot of statistical and clinical research in hand surgery. So we had a wide variety of researchers and teaching, and that was a good opportunity. So I think, the choice, sometimes it presents to you and sometimes it kind of falls in your lap. So for me, it just fell in my lap.
Yeah, it fell in my lap as well. But I would say that I love taking care of complicated problems. And it's hard to do that. So you get a little bit of a pass in that regard if you work in an academic center. I know Kyle's established a great practice. And I think it's much harder to do that in private practice than it is in an academic center. There are patients that come to the Mecca for whatever reason. But for me, the scope of practice is sort of like it replicated my hand fellowship. So in the past week, I did a arthroscopic shoulder release on a 1.5-year-old with a tendon transfer for brachial plexus palsy. I did a total elbow. I did a total shoulder, an elbow arthroscopy, wrist arthroscopy, and a variety of hand cases. So for me, I would say I would probably have a hard time doing that scope in private practice. And it's a blast. It's a lot of fun. There are some minuses, as Tom alluded to, working for the man. But I think it's a little bit of a misnomer to say academics anymore, because money has to come from somewhere. And so, we're accountable to our bottom line. And so, it's important to look at the model. And so for us, it's still cash-based, and we are highly incentivized in our group. I developed an incentive model, and it's very transparent. On the downside, we don't have opportunities for passive income. We don't have a surgery center. We don't have therapy, radiology. So those are definitely some minuses if you're looking, to maximize your income. I would say in academics, it depends on where you are, but you may start with a higher salary, but the ceiling is lower than in private practice. But it's a balance. I don't know. For me, I just had a passion for doing this, and it was like an extension of my fellowship. Although some people think I'm still like a PGY 26 or something, as opposed to faculty.
Yeah, I have kind of an interesting perspective, because in your comments, Tom, about the employed model. So I started in academics, very similar, at UT Southwestern, very similar to what you guys are. Then I transitioned to the private corporate sector. So I worked with HCA for the 6 years that I referred to. And that was still an employed model, but it was in the private side. And it was very different. My experience was very different from the academic employed model. And I think the difference was the focus, what the focus of my practice was supposed to be. So coming from academics, I was, the focus was teaching and, covering a very wide variety of cases and contributing, if I could, to research or things like that. When I transitioned to the private employed model, it was all about money. So there was no teaching, and there was no interest in teaching, and there was no interest in research. And so I was I was maybe a little surprised, maybe I was a little naive going into that model. thinking that they would be as interested in my interest in teaching or as interested in doing lectures. And there was no interest in anything other than seeing patients. So I saw that as a negative. And so for me, personally, for me, that wasn't something that I enjoyed. There was very little independence. I mean, I think for those people who are interested in maintaining some independence or some control of their practice, I found that control to be even less in the private or corporate sector. Basically, they tell you what to do, when to do it, and your practice is what they want it to be. And so it was, I found it very stifling from the standpoint of having any say in how my practice was arranged or how my practice would be conducted, how many, even down to the point of how many patients would I see per day. And of course, I had no say in insurance plans or what type of demographics my practice would have. So that was, to me, a negative. And I found that I eventually, obviously, I've left that model because I just, either I was too old to be told what to do or too cantankerous or whatever, I don't know, but it just I didn't find the relationship with the administration to be positive and to be satisfying from the standpoint of just being happy to go to work or being satisfied, not even thinking about what the financial reimbursements were, but just being satisfied with my day-to-day practice or satisfied with, getting up and going to work. I found I wasn't happy doing that because I really saw my practice just deteriorating before my eyes because of the control that this particular corporate structure was taking. So I don't know. So I found that I didn't find it as stifling in the academic world. I mean, I found that I had a little bit more say in my practice now. Was that because of the institution I was in? Was that because I had a chair that was very strong and was very, was able to protect us and kind of shield us from these corporate things? I don't know that, but I found that I was very, very constricted in the private sector. So I think the participants would just be aware of that, because I think a lot of the private hospital systems are aggressively recruiting orthopedic surgeons and aggressively recruiting and even internists and hand surgeons and but I think you have to just be very cautious. And I also found that negotiating wasn't really on the table. I mean, the contract they gave you is the contract you have. So there wasn't a lot of room for negotiation. And your first contract is going to be your best contract. The second, your renewal contract is probably going to look a little different because they're going to tighten the restrictions a little bit, tighten your RVUs. There's going to be things, and you feel, at least I did, somewhat helpless in negotiating that to my advantage because they were like, either take it or leave it. That's just what it is. So I think that's something just to be aware of. That's a difference from the employed models.
We're going to come back to contracts in a little more detail too, because I think there's a lot to discuss in that regard. So Becky, I mean, your practice is very academic. Obviously, you're a dean and so forth. So I'm sure we have hand therapists watching. Tell us about that.
So yeah, good question. I will say, before we get there, at the beginning of my career, I was in an academic practice with academic hand surgeons. And I think that's a really important point to bring up about the relationship between hand therapists and hand surgeons in an academic versus a private model. When I work with therapists across the country, I hear very strongly from therapists that it's very hard to get a hold of doctors and surgeons when you're in the private model, just because they're not as connected. I could walk through a hallway and speak with any of our plastic surgeons and walk across the hallway, and quite frankly did office hours with the doctors at WashU, which was an amazing learning experience for me, but it was also a wonderful opportunity for our patients to have really good continuity of care and really good connection with residents and fellows. And we were a part of that education. And so it was really nice to be able to help with resident fellow education as those systems. Shriners was the same. At Shriners, we got to work with all the residents and fellows from multiple places, which was wonderful wonderful. And so what I would encourage anyone who's listening is to really think about the connectivity to your therapist. And if you're going to make post-op orders, how easy is it for them to contact you, especially for complex cases or cases in which they need to know things about integrity of structures or your perceived kind of interest or want to help manage kind of the post-op therapy kind of progression, so to speak. From an academic perspective as a therapist, yes, I've moved into more of an academic realm, and it's actually really interesting now to work with students in a pro bono clinic, but also to take students to other countries to provide care and to have different types of relationships with surgeons in those capacities. Our surgeons in our local area, we treat a lot of underserved patients in our pro bono clinic. And so it's a wonderful opportunity for our local doctors to know that we have a free service for any patient for underinsured, uninsured, or those who have run out of insurance benefits. As far as traveling, it's been a wonderful, gosh, it's just been a life-changing experience to travel with surgeons and hand surgeons to other countries and have my students be able to be in the ORs with them, to really learn from some of the best congenital hand surgeons there are and be part of those practices. So I think your hope is always that your therapists are academically minded, that they're in their literature, that they're also in your literature, and they're keeping up with the most relevant and up-to-date ways to treat patients, but also keeping up with the new progressive surgeries so that they understand the procedures that you're performing. Helping your therapist to obtain that literature or understand your procedures is a wonderful gift that you'll give to them.
That's great. Hey, Kyle, any comments about privatemics? And when you're making those comments, also, I really agree with Becky in terms of the relationship with the therapist in an academic practice. Is it different in a private practice? How does all that work?
I have a lot of thoughts. I mean, I think the comments that everybody made are really interesting. And, you know, to encapsulate my approach, I would say that, and I know it almost sounds impossible, but you can do anything you want to do in private practice. You know, you can go be employed by a big corporation. You can go work for Kaiser or for HCA, as Kim did. Or you can find a group and you can be an employee of the group and, you know, collect your paycheck and do your cases and do your time and focus on, you know, the free time that you have and live your life that way. And the reason I left academics really is because I love operating so much. There is nothing that I've found in life that makes me as excited or gives me the gratification that I get from operating. And when I say operating, I mean doing an operation. There's something that I've, you know, the day I walked into the operating room as a medical student, I said, that's it, I'm going to be a surgeon. And I have never lost that love of surgery. And I love physically fixing problems and taking care of patients. And I was frustrated in full-time academics that I would have these cases that would come to see me, and I would watch the residents and the fellows struggle through these cases that I knew I could do faster and better and be more proud of at the end of the operation. And it drove me crazy. And I just realized I don't belong in full-time academics because I want to be doing these operations. You know, the free flaps, I was there for 18, 24 hours. My residents would come and go. I would take a 15-minute pee break and I would be there for a day and a half sometimes, you know, just doing it. And that's what I still love to do. But I liked teaching. So having an affiliation with the university allows me to do that. I lecture, the residents come and they, you know, they enjoy spending time in the office. I let them come to the OR. I still do the operations and they know that, look, Dr. Bickel has a private center. We can learn a lot, but he's going to be doing the surgery. And that's just the way it is. They can do the cases when they're at the university, but then when they're with me, they watch me do it. I talk to them, I teach them. I spend as much time as I can in the office educating them. I try to mentor them, but I do the surgery because I love it. I take care of my patients because I love it. I don't have a PA because I love taking care of patients. And so it's a lot of work. And I also run the business. One of the things I was frustrated in being in academics was that we had a business manager for the practice and everything was opaque. I didn't really know where the money came from. I didn't know where the money went. I didn't negotiate any of the contracts. And all of this stuff affected me and my bottom line, but I had zero control and often not even any awareness of it. So running a center and starting it, I'm the physician in charge, I'm the director, I'm also the CEO, I'm the president of the corporation. And so I get to negotiate all the contracts. I work with the hospitals. I hire and fire, so I have employment contracts. I mean, it's you have to be willing to wear a lot of hats, but that's what I like to do. So one of the things that drove me into private practice was the ability to do things the way I wanted to do them and to be as involved in everything as I could be. I don't like sitting on the sidelines and watching. To Becky's point, I really enjoyed working with hand therapists in residency and in fellowship and had a close relationship with them. I've also done a lot of international travel and I loved working with therapists in that regard. And so when I started my center, I mentored hand therapists in training from the hospital who came and worked with me. And one of them became so enamored of our relationship that when she decided to go out and practice, she asked me if she could come work for me. And instead of having her work for me in an economic model where I would profit off of her activities, I just let her set up her practice in my office and just charged her rent. And we've maintained that relationship for more than 20 years now. And it's been a wonderful relationship. She now has a dozen therapists working for her, all of whom I've gotten to work with. And so, you know, it sounds crazy to say it, but you really can do everything that you want to do in a private model if you're willing to work hard enough and if you're willing to learn as you go along. I didn't know anything about business when I started. I came from fellowship, full-time academics. I didn't know anything about running a corporation. I read books, I took some online courses, and I just jumped in with both feet first. I made some mistakes. I made a lot of the usual business mistakes early on, but you learn from them. And if you're flexible and if you're motivated and if you're smart and you're hardworking, you end up figuring it out. So it's very gratifying. It's very stressful. One thing I will say to the residents and fellows is when you're in academics and you fantasize about private practice, you think, I'm going to be out there golfing and playing tennis 3 days a week. I'm going to have so much free time. Nobody's going to tell me what to do or when to do it or how to do it. You are married to your job 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. You are never, ever free. Yes, I mean, you have a family, you have hobbies, but you have to figure out when to do them. And the phone is always in your pocket, and you never, ever get that weekend that you get when you're academic saying, okay, this guy's on call, I'm just going to take off. It's always there, it's always with you. So you have the flexibility to kind of structure it the way you want, but you're never, ever truly free. And that is not right for everybody. Some people like working for someone else and letting them handle all the problems and taking all the headaches on board. And for them, I think a business model or an academic practice is great. And for people who really want to get into the nuts and bolts of it and run things and figure it out, private practice is a great opportunity to do that.
Tom, can I ask you a question?
Absolutely.
Henry Mencken, my mentor, used to say that, any surgeon has to be a lifelong student. And I just wonder, does it really matter that we start parsing this into academic and private? At the end of the day, we all got to be students. And how does that lifelong period of education factor into our lives, whether we have a phone in our pocket all the time or someone else is taking the calls? And I'm interested to hear what other people have to say.
So you're asking how people stay engaged and constantly learning through their careers, depending on what practice. Yeah, I think just from my perspective, I think I'm better off having somebody there pushing me, having the resident ask me questions and, being ready for conferences and having to give talks and things like that tend to push me along. I would be willing to bet that Kyle doesn't need that sort of pushing. Sounds like that's more innate for him.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know what other people think.
But even if Kyle doesn't need it, does Kyle do it because he has an innate inbuilt mechanism that drives him to do that? i.e., if you didn't have that, would that make you any less or any different? I mean, don't we
Yeah.
have to be learning all the time?
It's an important question, Chai, and I will say thank you, Tom, for sticking up for me. But I will say that I see a lot of my colleagues in private practice who aren't self-motivated, and they don't keep up, and they don't learn a lot. They don't, they don't teach. They don't go to courses except, the bare minimum to keep up their CME requirements. And when I have discussions with them about cases, or when they run cases by me, or what often happens when I see their cases for second opinions, it's clear to me that they aren't really keeping up with current trends, with literature. They're not practicing evidence-based medicine. And so it does require a lot of motivation. You have to be driven to excellence, and excellence, as we all know, includes teaching and learning throughout your career. And the reason I'm here tonight is because one of the main vehicles for me to accomplish that in my career has been my affiliation with AO. And it's been the best part of my career, quite honestly. It's where most of my closest friendships in hand surgery have come from. It's where I've learned the most. When I go to these courses and I quote unquote teach at these courses, as we will all agree, you end up going home from a course having learned more than you taught, because we're teaching alongside the best and the brightest. And if you just sit and pay attention when you're not lecturing, you absorb all of this information. And then that pushes me. I don't want to show up to a course and be the dummy in the room. I mean, I'm sitting here with you guys, and women, and it pushes me to want to be better, and I want to keep up, and I want to have something to contribute. So I think that your point, Chai, is really important, that people going into private practice have to realize that, it's not a free ride, and that one of the most important and one of the most gratifying things of any career is teaching yourself. And what I tell my residents and fellows, and what I told my junior associate when he started with me, is that the learning really starts when you walk out that door after your fellowship, because you're going to look over your shoulder in these tough cases. There's going to be nobody there. And if you're not prepared and you haven't figured it out before that case starts, you're in big trouble. And that pressure motivates you as well. The pressure to know that the buck stops with you, and you better know what you're doing, because somebody is putting their trust in you to take care of them.
Absolutely.
I think on that segue, I would say that it's very important to have a mentor. I found that the first year of practice was the most challenging. I don't know about you guys, but the first few months of the first year was the most challenging in the practice. And to have a mentor, I was lucky in my case, but you must have a mentor and a coach to be able to run some of these hard cases by, and to ask their opinions, and to be able to have access to that person. The other thing is, your skills, if you don't practice certain skills, they'll deteriorate. So if you're going to do microsurgery, I would say find a lab, and you got to be able to do some rat work throughout the year, from whenever you get time. And anatomy, find an anatomy lab, or go to these courses and revise your anatomy, because it's not that it's changing, but your knowledge of it will increase. And so it's keeping up with all these aspects of surgery is going to be critical in the first year and subsequently in your life, because learning is lifelong.
That's great. How about we transition to a little discussion about ancillary income? Chuck brought up the concept that at his institution, ancillary income wasn't included. How is it factored into your career, and is it something that people should consider as they're thinking about making decisions?
Well, in our practice, when I started my practice with Clannad, we had a huge private practice, which is also academic. So in that practice, we had a lot of expenses. But we also had certain ancillary income, like we had a big therapy department. But what we did was we donated the therapy department to our educational aspect. So all the fellowship was funded through the earnings of the therapy department. We could have kept that money to ourselves and not fund the education, but everyone felt that we had to fund the research and the education, and that's how it was funded. So that was our contribution to the research and education process.
Kim, is it an important component of your private practice?
So, I mean, I think it's not a deal breaker one way or the other, but I do have opportunity in this setting now that I'm in the private practice setting. We have a therapy in our office now. And so the therapists, we have 3 therapists that are full-time that work in our office, and they, so that income, or that is some ancillary income for me that I didn't have an opportunity either in the academic employee model or in the private kind of corporate model to have. So that's I guess a plus from the financial side. And also, I don't know that I've not taken advantage of it, but I think if I wanted to, I have the opportunity to invest, at least in Texas. I don't know how other states are as far as they're allowing doctors to invest in surgery centers or invest in those kind of things. But in Texas, we have the opportunity to do that still. And so, I mean, that's another chance for me to, if I chose to do that, which I haven't, but if I could, to invest in a surgery center and to get some, you know, outside ancillary income to supplement my basic practice. And I know there are other practices in Dallas and the area in Texas that have MRIs and other investments, and that their practices are affiliated with. So I think from the private setting, depending on your state's regulations, I guess, you would have an opportunity to supplement your income, which I guess could be used either to increase your income or to offset, you know, the volume of your practice. If you wanted to have, you know, chose for more of a lifestyle, maybe you want to take a day off a week. Maybe you don't only want to operate 1 day a week. I don't know, but I guess you could balance that way. So I know those choices are much more available in the private setting, at least from my perspective.
I think you're right. And certainly the location makes a huge difference. Certificate of Need states in the United States clearly is different. I'm in Texas too, and it's entirely different than other states in which I've practiced. And you can think different ways about ancillary income. You know, there are pluses and minuses. There may be even some ethical considerations depending on who you are and what you believe. But it's something to consider, I think, during job hunts.
Right.
Can I just make a point? Just it's not all doom and gloom for academics, but it's important to look at I would say sources of revenue and expense mitigation. So and taxes or tithes. So it depends on where you are, but if you are employed, some places you're employed by the university or really intimately associated with the university, and there may be a tithe or a dean's tax. There's money laundering that occurs. At our place, there is no money laundering, so we don't get anything from the medical school. We don't give anything to the medical school. And the medical school is not happy about that, but there is no dean's tax. We do get some money for teaching. That's some of that money is trickled down if you have a residency program. And it's not that much money, but it does help. And then in terms of expense mitigation, so we have split billing so that the technical revenue from the office goes to the hospital, but in exchange, they pay for our rent and they pay for almost all of our support staff. And for a group of 10 surgeons and a PA, we have 8 PAs, 7 of whom are covered by the hospital. So you may not see it as passive income, but it offsets a lot of those overhead expenses that you might consider. And just to take that a step further, Kim made a very important point, is that the most leverage you have is when you first sign. And so it's very important to know, and I wouldn't do this at your first interview by any means. You want to get to know the people, get them to know you, and not drill down into the finances. This is a discussion for later on, but just in terms of support, for example, your administrative assistant, your MA, or if you're going to have a PA, and will that be coming out of your own personal cost center in long term? And if if you're vested in some fashion, you know, what are the hurdles to that? So for us, a benefit, we haven't really talked about it, but the benefits package is pretty good. So it takes 2 years to be vested. And so that's something to consider as well. And, you know, some private practices, the hurdle is very high to become a partner. And I learned a lot when at some point before I became chair, I looked at an opportunity in private practice in the suburbs, and my overhead was $60,000 a year. That was my overhead assigned in my cost center. The overhead in this group was $600,000 a year. And I had no idea what that meant. It was an astronomical amount of money, but they have all these sources of passive income that we don't have. And it's like the bar is just moving up like this. It's not like this, right? It's going like this because your expenses end up getting really high too. So it's just something to consider.
Well, so that's maybe a good segue to contracts. So Kim, you started to talk about when you went to HCA that the contract was set in stone. I mean, it was not going to change,
Right.
no matter what you did. And I think personally, I think in academics, it's not that dissimilar. I think different academic centers do it differently, of course. You know, we use benchmarks and we pretty much hold to those benchmarks, potentially with some fluctuation based on community numbers and, you know, other more local benchmarks just past the, and including the AAMC. But I'm interested to know people's thoughts on the first contract and then thoughts on the second contract. You know, how does that work in your various settings?
Well, I can speak a little bit if I can to that question. So when I transitioned away from the academic setting, the hospital system that I was going to was very interested in orthopedic hand surgery. They had a need for that. And so I was courted away from, at that time, away from the academic setting. So things were very rosy. And, you know, the contract was very comparable to what I had at the academic center. So it was a lateral move financially. And, you know, I mean, the discussions were very pleasant and they were very positive and, you know, this and that. So that worked out great. So then I made the transition. So my contract was a 3-year contract. So then the renewal time came around and it was like I was in a different world. I don't know. It's like I woke up in a different world and all of a sudden it wasn't so friendly and it wasn't so, you know, kind of collegial. And it was really like, there was like a harsh, I mean, not that I'm bashing HCA. I don't want to say that because that's not the case, but just my experience was that, you know, it was the contract that I was presented was very different from my first contract, despite the fact that my practice volumes hadn't changed at all and my case numbers hadn't changed. I mean, I maintained a very robust practice. I didn't take any days off, put it that way. And then it was there was no guarantee anymore. There was no like, you know, safety net. It was all going to be RVU based. And that also had some, I guess, stipulations based on how much revenue was brought in from my practice. But the problem being that I didn't have control of my revenue. I mean, I didn't have control of my billing. Billing was outside of my office. I didn't have control of my contracts for insurance. I didn't have control of working my billing or the things that had been denied. That was all worked on an external site. And I in fact had no communication with any of the people that were working my bills or my denials. So I had zero control of revenue, but I was being held accountable for it on the contract side. So that's kind of a bad setup. So I think the participants need to be very cautious and understand when they step into that model, you know, just kind of what is the language? What is it going to be like? What is that? How much control are you going to have? So that's kind of what I found. And I found it almost, I mean, you know, here I am 15 years into practice, and I'm making less potentially than I made the first year out of my fellowship. That's how different it was. And that was pretty much a deal breaker. And that's why I transitioned away from that model. But yeah, that just to be cautious, read the contract. And then I actually did, in my naive state, thinking that I could negotiate this, actually retained like an employment contract attorney and had, and it was just a waste of money in my case, because they, the corporate kind of people looked at it and said, yeah, we're not making any of those changes. Either you take it or leave it. So I left it. But that was just, I think you have to know going in that you be prepared that like I said, your first contract is going to be your best one. After that, you're going to have to, really have to kind of fight for it, probably, in many cases. Maybe not all, but many cases.
Hey, Tom, there's a question.
Yes.
It's twofold. One half of it is from me, and the other half of it is from Nikola Lekic. So from me, it is, do all of us who are not necessarily JDs need to have an attorney look over the contract before we sign on the dotted line? And Nicola says, for those of us entering private practice, what advice do you have for getting your name out there and expanding your patient and referral base? What are some of the things that you think are useful? I'll leave it with you.
Well, I'll start with the lawyer, because at Baylor, in an academic center, having a lawyer is going to make any difference. It's wasted money for people. Very similar to what you said, Kim. However, in other venues, and I saw Kyle kind of nodding his head, yeah, I need a lawyer. There certainly is a role. So I would think in a private practice, in a situation where there is flexibility, especially if you note concern in the contract when you read it, I personally think that's the time that the attorney is necessary. Kyle, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it depends on your attorney as far as your feeling about Baylor. If you have a good enough attorney, you can negotiate with anybody and you can negotiate about anything. Nothing is set in stone until the names are inked on the page. And anytime you're taking a job, I think you should have an attorney to look over any piece of paper that you're about to sign. And obviously you have to have an attorney that you trust, who has your best interests, who has your fiduciary interests at heart. But without that, I think, you're just floating along in the water and hoping that you don't go over the waterfall. So I would say, yes, you need an attorney, and you need a good attorney that you trust. Secondly, and this is from personal experience, I think that a couple of other points. Number one, you need to get to know the people that you are thinking about working with. You can't just go on one interview and spend an hour where they wine you and dine you and blow smoke up your you-know-what, and walk away thinking, oh, they think I'm great and they're going to take care of me. Because, as Kim said, there's a lot of seduction involved, and they're going to put on their best clothes and put their best foot forward. And then you come back a year later and they're like, who are you again? And so you need to get to know the people that you're going to work with. And you need to get to know who they are, what kind of people they are, what kind of relationship they want to have with you. Do you feel like they have your best interests at heart? Are they going to take care of you? Are they going to promote you? Are they going to be colleagues? Are they going to mentor you? And that's hard to do in a very short setting. So I would recommend, if you can, going back 2, 3, 4 times and spending as much time, hopefully, even off site. Just go to dinner where you can get somebody off guard and really see who they are and what they're like outside of the office. The other point is, if you're going to sign a contract, and this is obviously in the private sector, in a private practice, do some research and find out if other people have worked with those people. And then talk to the folks who had your job before. Talk to the folks who they've worked with. Maybe they left a group to start their practice. There are always other people, and there are frequently dead bodies left behind. And find out from those people, what is this person like? Is this a good person? Is this not a good person? Are they going to screw me? Or are they going to take care of me? And you'll be amazed at what people will tell you when they don't feel burdened by having a current relationship, the contract is over, they don't have an NDA, and they'll tell you, yeah, don't ever work with this person. Or, I really, really enjoyed every minute I spent with them. They were honest, they were ethical, they took good care of their patients, you're in good hands. And trust your gut. If you're going into a contract feeling, well, this doesn't sound right, but I'm sure it'll work out, and I'm smart, and they're not going to pull the wool over my eyes, I would recommend you turn around and walk away. If you're going into a relationship where you're going to be working and you're going to be working together and there's money involved, you better be able to trust them. And if your gut is telling you anything other than, yeah, this is a solid person and a good opportunity, you shouldn't take it.
So how about practice promotion? So what should you look for in your job in regard to promotion? I don't know, probably one of the private practice experts ought to comment on that first, and then we can mention academic approaches.
And it'd be interesting to hear Becky also. How would you promote a private practice, Becky? We'll go in sequence.
And I guess you want me to talk about promoting a hand therapy practice.
Correct.
So I think the first thing I would do would be, and it's interesting to ask this question, but I would want to know how connected I am with hand surgeons in my area through continuing education opportunities. Because the first thing, as you've said earlier in this talk, is you have to show up. If you want to be great, you have to show up. You have to do the work. You have to choose to be excellent, and you have to make connections in your community. So your reputation will precede you at the beginning of your career and throughout your career. So if I was opening a private practice in my town right now, I would be visiting with surgeons. I would be finding out where local continuing education is happening. I would also be finding out if I could go to grand rounds. Where can I show up? At what time of the day, night, whenever it is, to make sure that people around me see that I'm really committed and want to do really well for their patients. It's not going to help just to kind of think you can, stick your shingle out and have people come to you. You're going to have to do the work to make sure that you build it. And unfortunately, I think you have to be a little bit patient. I think your outcomes and your reputation will be built by your successes. And so I think being a little bit patient with yourself, and I'm sure that Kyle can speak to this, I'm sure that a practice isn't built in a day. And I think the finances come with time. But I think thinking you're going to be successful in the immediate phase may be a little bit of, I don't think that's going to really happen.
Yeah, those are all good points.
I would, this is Harry, I would, because I've been in all these models, and it's wonderful to hear this discussion of an hour. But when you first start out, try to learn more, become the expert, take on the toughest cases, don't say no. Your reputation will build as you take on difficult things, whether you're in a big group, a small group, yourself, academic, wherever you are. Word will get out that, this person really, he or she takes on the tough case. They do a great job. They communicate. I would send my family member to him. And that will continue, I think, and what made me think, as what Becky said, that will continue as you go on. And that happens with continued education, watching videos, being a learner, like Chai says, as you transition to that first year. I remember keeping my logbook from fellowship and adding to it. Every tough case, I take notes and add to it and bounce it off a mentor or a partner. Hey, what do you think about this? Continue to do that, no matter what setting you're in.
Hey, Tom.
Amit, you're muted. Amit, you're
so.
muted.
Tom, can I just share a couple of quotes?
Of course.
Because the hour's running out. Two quotes. One's from Jesse Jupiter, and that is, if you can do hand surgery, you can do anything. And you all have had outstanding training, and you are capable of more than just hand surgery if you choose. And many of you who do hand fellowships are going to have practices in which a component of your practice is hand, but there will be lots of other things that you potentially will be doing. And you can leverage that. You are a subspecialist, but also you have assets in the general orthopedic world, especially in trauma. And trauma is highly valued in many communities. And you should, if you're interested in that, leverage that because lots of hospitals make plenty of money off of trauma. It's necessary for their viability and their responsibility to the community. And then the second one is from my former CEO, and that is, it's a question. Do you measure what you value or value what you measure? And it's very important when you're looking at a job to know what they value. you may not get that at the first visit, but ask those questions. And like Kyle said, former employees would be very helpful to know, what's the real story. And then the same thing for you. We haven't really had time to talk about family and the role that family plays in your decision making. And I would say this pandemic has given us lots of perspective. And those of you who have families or anticipating having families, it's nice to have family in your areas, especially at a time like now. This really highlights that. And so those are important decisions that may outweigh the specific location in terms of the venue. Maybe the city or the region is more important.
Chuck, that is a very important point you raised. I know we are running out of time, but we're going to take more time because I think this is really critical. And Tom and you and all of us who are parents, it's really important. So please spend a few minutes on the family aspect. Thanks.
So going on with Chuck's thing, I want to put another quote, which my mentor, Dr. Clowney, used to say, and that has stuck with me throughout my life. He says, be amiable, be available, and be able. And if you do all these three things, you will be successful in whatever you do, especially in private practice. So my first year was spent in going out and meeting family doctors. And although we had the only game in town, I had to go out and do all these television appearances and all that. But after that, I think the most important thing about increasing your practice is word of mouth. You do a good job on somebody, they tell their friends, they tell 5 people, there's 5 people, tell another 5 people. So that is the best way to increase your practice, word of mouth. So I just want to leave a few things, I want to say. One is that, when you're starting practice, it's easy to take the path of least resistance. I've seen so many young hand surgeons become carpal tunnel surgeons. Don't be that. If you take the challenging cases, do the hard stuff. You do the hard stuff because that's what you perhaps want to do. Because if you keep doing this easy stuff, then when you're 50, you will be bored of that. So don't ever get bored of what you do. Keep doing the hard stuff and keep your enthusiasm intact.
And I think in regard to what Chuck said, really thinking about alignment with your job, because and as you think about how it affects your family, you have to be happy in work, or it helps to be happy in work and happy at home. It's not like they're separate lives necessarily. It all blends. And I think if you feel content and you feel contributing and you feel like you're adding to society or whatever it is that really drives you at work, I think that's going to help you at home. And I don't think you should negate that. And when I think about family and trying to take care of the 4 rugrats I have, and how my wife and I handle all this stuff, it's just so much easier when I'm happy at work. If I've had a bad day, if I'm having a bad time at work, I just don't do as well. So that's why spending time thinking about where you want to work, the alignment of yourself with that group or with that environment, I think is very important. Any other last comments?
Well, I would like to make just one comment, just kind of about Chai's kind of, asking us to speak about family. I mean, I think for male and female participants tonight, the idea of balance, and I said this earlier to the panelists, but the idea of balance, it doesn't exist, okay? So you can't be completely balanced. So just accept it and move on. Do not spend time feeling guilty about it. It's not worth feeling guilty about. I spent the first probably 5 years of my 4 kids' life feeling guilty that I was missing this or missing that. It was stupid, okay? So just don't do it. You do the best you can. It's not a balance, it's a juggling act. Every day is a juggling. You juggle, you try to keep all the balls in the air, and you guys are laughing because I'm right about this, right? Try to keep the balls in the air. At the end of the night, if you can say, I've done the best I could today, you're successful. You did it. You made it. If you have to give up a case to go to, your son's baseball game, and do it. There'll be another case. If you have to miss the baseball game because you're on call, you have to do that. You have to have responsibility. Don't feel guilty about either one. Just do the best you can. And, you know, have a family, enjoy them, spend time with them, enjoy your career, put yourself, like Tom was saying, in a role where maybe it's not about the most money. It's about how you wake up every morning and you want to go to work because you really like the situation you're in. And that is going to go farther and carry you farther than any amount of money could. So just don't feel guilty. So that's my last word.
If I could add another female perspective, the other thing I would say is that we're teaching our children so much by the ways we're committed to our jobs, by the ways we're committed to lifelong learning, by the joy we find in what we do. And we're teaching them to try to find the same things in their lives. And so while we may be missing things at home, reminding ourselves that, especially for our daughters, I just can't say enough about a strong woman who's committed to her work and successful in her work, and what that teaches young women about their own futures and their own possibilities.
Well, I think that's great. That's a perfect comment to end on tonight. I thank the panelists. All your comments, your perspectives were extremely valuable, I'm sure, to the.
Tom, can I say one last thing, please?
Oh, I already finished. No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
This is very important. I wanted to make a comment about complications, and we haven't touched on this because complications will happen to people and how to deal with them. I went to a surgeon's retirement, and in that he said something. He said, retirement for a surgeon is a deliverance from the tyranny of complications. Think about that. So complications, it's not a good, he who can deal with the complications is the better surgeon than who says he doesn't get any complications. Everyone gets complications. So don't let complications beat you up. Learn from it and deal with it in a proper fashion and take care of the patient.
And try not to make the same mistake twice.
Right.
Well, again, thanks you to everybody who participated. Thank you to those in the audience. I hope it was a valuable experience for you. And let's see, I'm going to share my screen, complete this. So can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah, good. So we're, as I said, done with our series, but we still have two interviews remaining, I believe, in regard to our Sage on Stage episodes, which occur on Tuesday nights. You can see August 4th and August 18th. They're really valuable. You really get a great perspective from these truly spectacular surgeons. You can see Neil Ford Jones and Doug Hanna are on the agenda coming up. And these are some other AO North America hand courses. I think, Chai, were you going to discuss these?
Yeah, sure. So firstly, thanks to all of the panelists from tonight. I can't thank you enough for doing such a spectacular job with discussion of what we should do after fellowship, because this is the dark underbelly of hand surgery, which almost never gets discussed, and that you are so candid is really helpful. It's been an amazing 14 weeks. Yeah, I know it's hard to say that, but it's 14 weeks that we've done this Must Know series. It's been, as chairman of the Hand Education Committee, I find it hard to say this enough, that it's been teamwork. It's teamwork that all of us have done this. AO North America, the people who sit in the office, and the entire faculty. We've managed to do this for 14 weeks and we can't see this stopping. So we are going to keep this going because I think it's important what we do to keep you, the audience, engaged, productive, and all of us better the field of hand surgery. So we are going to be starting this series called the Hand Surgery Essentials Live, which is dedicated to all hand surgery learners, residents, fellows, PAs, nurse practitioners, and hand therapists, anyone and everyone interested in hand surgery. That will be running for 10 weeks from September 10 to November 19, just before Thanksgiving. We will also be aiming to do the Advanced Risk Summit live because we could not do it as an in-person. Chuck Cassidy and Marco Rizzo are going to be moderating that as a 6 to 8 week course. And we will have details of that coming up. And in an effort to engage our advanced learners as well as our mid-career learners, we will be starting a hand consultation corner live in early January of 2021. Again, thank you to everyone. Tom and Chuck, you did a spectacular job tonight as usual. And to all the staff at AO North America, including the IT staff who have shepherded us through these last 14 weeks, I tip my hat to you. Thank you all and good night. I'll see you in September and I'll see you in August for the last 2 sessions of Sage on Stage. Take care, guys, and be safe.